The median income of a U.S. household rose for a third straight year in 2017 as solid economic growth helped put more people into full-time jobs, keeping unemployment rates low. Incomes for a typical U.S. household, adjusted for inflation, rose 1.8% from $60,309 in 2016 to $61,372, according to newly released data from the U.S. Census Bureau. At the same time, the data underscores the growing disparity between the wealthiest and the poorest Americans, along with the lasting damage the Great Recession did to the majority of American families. U.S. households are still earning essentially the same that they did in 2007, just before the Great Recession. The income of a typical household today is about where it was 18 years ago, said Robert Greenstein, president of the Center for Budget and Policy Priorities. The inflation-adjusted median income remains slightly below the record in 1999 of $62,000, Census said. Last year's median income increase was slower than gains of 5.1% in 2015 and 3.1% in 2016. Some of that slowdown reflected sharply higher inflation, which was just 0.1% in 2015 and 1.3% the following year. It rose to 2.2% in 2017. Higher prices for gas, housing and other goods and services are eroding income gains even more this year. Consumer prices increased 2.9% in July from a year earlier, matching June's pace as the fastest in 6 years. The proportion of Americans living in poverty also dropped for the third straight year, down to 12.3% from 12.7%. The figures suggest that the nation's very low unemployment rate, 3.9%, is forcing businesses to convert more part-time workers to full-time status. During 2017, the unemployment rate averaged 4.4%, the lowest level in 17 years. And with the ranks of the unemployed dwindling, companies are hiring more people who previously weren't looking for work. The number of people with jobs rose by 1.7 million in 2017, the census report said. And the number of workers with full-time permanent jobs increased by 2.4 million. We're continuing to see that shift from part-time, part-year work to year-round, full-time work, Trudy Renwick, an assistant division chief at the Census Bureau, said. Despite shrinking unemployment rates, income inequality worsened as the wealthiest Americans enjoyed even larger pay increases. The median household income is the point at which half the households are below and half are above. It can be a more telling measure than the average, which is distorted by extremely high incomes among the wealthiest households. Share this article. Share wealthier Americans pulled further ahead last year. Even steady growth over the previous 8 years hasn't been enough to counter long-running trends to greater economic inequality. Well-worn patterns of inequality re-emerged, with stronger growth at the top, said Elise Gould, a senior economist at the Economic Policy Institute, a liberal think tank. While any reduction in poverty or increase in income is a step in the right direction, most families have just barely made up the ground lost over the past decade. Income growth was strongest for the richest 5% of households, rising 3% to $237,034. For the poorest 1/5 of the population, incomes rose just 0.5%. As a result, the wealthiest 5% received 3.9 times the income earned by the median U.S. household. That's the highest on records dating back to 1967. In 2007, before the Great Recession, that multiple was 3.5. The median income for a white household rose to 6% to $68,145, even as the median for African American households slipped 0.2% to $40,258. Latino household incomes, however, jumped 3.7% to $50,486. Asian households remain the wealthiest, with a median income of $81,331, though that was 2% lower than in 2016. Still, nearly 40 million Americans remain poor by the Census Bureau's count. Census also considers the impact of various government assistance programs on reducing the ranks of the poor. The agency found that the food stamp program, formerly known as SNAP, lifted 3.4 million people out of poverty. Rental subsidies did the same for 2.9 million. President Donald Trump and House GOP leaders have proposed cuts in both those programs, Greenstein said, as well as Medicaid. Were such cuts to be enacted, we would almost certainly see increases in poverty as a result, he said. An estimated 28.5 million people remained uninsured in 2017, or 8.8% of the population, according to the census. Had the Republican repeal succeeded, that number could have increased by 20 million people or more over time. The census report did find that 14 states had notable losses in coverage, while 3 states experienced gains. All the states with gains had taken full advantage of the Obama health law by also expanding their Medicaid programs. But so had most of the states with coverage losses, including Massachusetts, whose state-based overhaul had been a template for the Obama law.